got a Mac. Is it Mac biggest?
Okay, once you go, you're going back.
Right, you?
You can.
Oh, no.
Really?
We're such wimps, aren't we?
I'm on the right side. All the apples on that.
Have no barrier to tolerate it.
You just go over my corners.
And I just got the iPhone too. I had a Droid or like a Samsung.
Got down to the 30s.
Before. I love the iPhone.
I've got my Droid until January 11th. Guess what happens on the 12th?
It's a dream device.
Yes.
I mean, my other one, battery.
Especially with the iCloud, it pushes everything to that, and you don't have to. It's really an anonymous commercial for Apple.
Pro Apple,
publishing.
but
Apple doesn't need a commercial.
they don't.
Speaks for itself.
The hardiest commercial of it all.
By us, you know, like convincing you to go buy it.
I bought a lot of their.
Sorry, all right.
Definitely figured out the model to make you dependent on all of their devices, because only their devices will, you know,
Yeah.
You won't get
Right.
it on
have
there.
their apps and their iTunes. And,
Well, if they get the checks, I don't think it's
Yeah.
We're capable. Jackie. We're good at that. Back up the door, not all the way to the lobby.
You go the wrong way.
I'm just playing back on what I told him. Sure that I was clear. He's not in the wrong place, so I'm hoping he's in the right place. You checked the wrong place? A lot of people have been going down
I
the
figured
hallway.
somebody understood.
Alice in Wonderland is me today.
It should be Friday if you're going to be like that.
Hey, Mark. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Mark.
Dr. Friesen. Sir?
I went over yonder. Well,
You want a doctor?
I don't want to be a doctor. You know what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm just going to wait for
That's a little slow. It's actually about 5 minutes long.
You sent out this agenda, didn't you, Eric? Or did you, Jeff? Oh, but you sent it out, okay. I'm trying to find it in my mail, and that's gone.
Mark Goldstein.
Oh, okay.
For the whales, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you.
here's copies of the agenda if people need them. I think we should start. We should probably do introductions.
Do we have anyone on the
We
phone?
do. We have a few folks on the phone. I'm Michelle Noren. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the University of Arizona, and I agreed, I'm not sure why I did this, but I agreed to coordinate us as a group, purely coordinate. So,
With an occasional contribution, I hope, as
well,
well.
lots of contribution by team members, and we'll talk about that today. And so I tried to put some semblance of an agenda together, and we can talk about what we'll go through in a minute. But let's see who else is here. Do you know?
I'm Chad Kirkpatrick. I'm a consultant, and I represent GovNet, and I apologize in advance. I'll need to leave around 12.
I'm Susan Annabelle. I'm with Cox Communications.
Emerson Yearwood with Cable One.
Hi, I'm Dennis Fennessy, an independent consultant.
Mark Goldstein, International Research Center, and I lead the broadband assessment contractor team.
Eric Thomas, I'm the project manager on the broadband grant.
I'm Jeff Crane, project manager.
Horace Friesen, I'm the vice chair of the ATIC, and I'm also on the education task group for ABDC and the outreach and economic development task.
And how about on the phone? Who do we have on the phone?
Patty Coburn from Intel.
Okay, very good. So just to remind us about our scope, this is the group that will focus on putting together a strategic plan. And part of what we talked about last time, and we'll talk about this at some point in our agenda, part of what we talked about last time I wondered about was how we tie in the work of the other task forces and maybe some of the other initiatives in the state. And so I put an agenda together to hopefully sort of facilitate us through the process. At some point we have to think about what our approach needs to be in building our plan. And so out of our last meeting we talked about plans from other states or other entities and sent out a list or series of links to those plans. So I thought we would spend a little bit of time, or maybe a good chunk of time, talking about what we saw in those plans, maybe some of the good parts, maybe the not so good parts. And I think we joked last time about can't we just copy one and put Arizona on it. And so I'll just open it up to thoughts or input from you all. What did you think about the materials that you reviewed? Hopefully everybody had a chance to review them. There was a lot. I don't know that I read every word, but I at least took some time to review through at a high level. Any thoughts, or what do you guys think of that?
Well, I did quickly or briefly look at what Jeff sent out this morning, Colorado, their local planning teams, and I thought that was very well organized, what they did out there. I don't know how successful they are and how much they're doing with this, but at least from an organizational piece, it was very well constructed.
And it's a chance to look at it. But
This is Patty.
Are they actually working this right now? It's more of a document for how, I guess, they're going to plan out their broadband and how they're going to organize who's on it and who does what. I don't know how far down the path they are. So governance, I guess.
That was sent out by Mike Keeling. Mike Keeling pulled that from.
Right.
Really, it's more of a lessons learned document.
So I believe it. Yeah, exactly that.
It's
lessons learned. They've implemented and gone through that process.
That might be even more valuable, and that was my big question going through the materials is, particularly with California, seeing what their objectives were and, the original executive order, and there were a lot of very, noble, ambitious goals. I'm more curious about, okay, so how has it worked? What's been accomplished in 5 years since that original executive order from Governor Schwarzenegger created their task force, and they identified all the things, getting the state to do a unified permitting process. Okay, did they get there? Those are things I'm probably more curious about is what's happened.
And though not specifically on those plans sent out, I haven't had that much time with those, but I think we have a real issue for scope. Are we dealing with primarily legislative and regulatory issues, as, for example, the right-of-way study? I don't know if this links to this have been circulated to this group. They were...
We sent those out after
the
first meeting.
And this represents a legislative and regulatory approach to tower siting and right-of-way and even the two highways for the price of one concept, burying a fiber. But it's not a Ganzfeld, a worldview, which could go down to community level, training and affordability. So there's an issue to me in the strategic plan of how wide it's going, how integrated, what it how it approaches the provider environment directly, not just from a stand-back regulatory perspective. And so I think for us, if we're going to develop a strategic plan, or we have an issue of scope to work through, not just how is it structured, and what is a forward look versus a back look, but what elements of the strategic pie it purports to either engage. In some cases you just choose to track things, in other cases you choose to instigate and stand back, and in other cases you choose to take a heavier hand. And so just some thoughts.
I would think, though, that if we're talking about an Arizona strategy, it ought to be for Arizona and not a piece of pie or anything. I think, Mark, you hit a couple of great points, one of which is that, strategies are one thing, plans are another thing. So, it seems to me a strategic plan has to have a clear set of goals, a clear set of strategies to achieve the goals, and then a bunch of plans behind it to implement. Now, how you do that, I think one of the questions I raised in the very beginning by email was, one of the things I thought was missing out of all of these task groups was deployment planning group. Like, how do we get this thing done at some point? And to me, that's what I heard what you're talking to, Mark, because we ought to have a plan that's all-encompassing. I don't see how you can, just parse out part of it. You can parse out part of it for implementation purposes. You probably ought to. I mean, really, because you got to, based on what your strategy is. Like, do you want to go to the high-impact areas first? Do you want to go to whatever you choose to do? So I would say we ought to be pretty broad-minded. Not so broad-minded our brains fall out, but, just broad-minded around encompassing on the whole state and in the total goals for all of Arizona.
Though in terms of a deployment group per se, that to me only applies to the areas where you're taking a medium to a heavy hand. There are other areas where you're going to let the horses run, and hope they run the right way, but you're not going to have the authority or the resources to really control.
That's okay, though. I mean, you can have a deployment plan which says you subcontracted or outsourced or whatever it is, but you still need to...
Or you trust in others to do a piece that you relegate or acknowledge they'll own.
Trust but verify.
And in the strategy document, you can document your boundaries. Say, we will not deal with this issue as part of our strategy, just if you're going to exclude stuff specifically.
And the other piece is metrics. I haven't heard that word or variations on that word, but how do you measure success?
Well, I think I mentioned this thing about goals. I mean, to me, the goals are what you measure. I mean, your strategies are...
You got to have your goals before you know what you're measuring.
Yeah, so to me, that's a pretty big deal, is what the goals are. And that's kind of where I would sort of be starting to think about things, and then strategies kind of follow goals. I mean, hopefully, as opposed to the other way around.
I think another thing that needs to be defined is who is our audience. Are we addressing this to the legislature? Are we addressing it to the governor? Or are we addressing it to the providers or the population?
Or the communities.
The communities and the population and citizens of Arizona. Probably, to some degree, all of them. But that will tend to guide what it is we want to say also.
Or you can have multiple ways to say it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You do you do corporate boardroom presentations, or but based on a plan. You do stockholder. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can carve up and present what you have. But I think you're right. You're going to have to plan on having multiple presentations for this stuff.
And then what is the relationship with the other subcommittees? Are we taking their goals and then overall architecture? Who's the cart, who's the horse?
Well, I think in fact that plays into what was said earlier about deployment, because I think to some degree we're going to wind up equating deployment with the pilot sites or whatever is decided by some of the other task groups. At least in the initial stages, so we do need to factor whatever they're doing into our overall.
But there are a lot of moving pieces. Some are more application-oriented rather than infrastructure-oriented, such as e-learning and telehealth. You have two task groups that are built upon available or hoped-for infrastructure, but not infrastructure. And both telehealth and e-learning have their own strong and deep communities behind them that are often doing things that we'll have little control or influence on, but want to be able to integrate and build upon. So the strategy should be what we can do, what we know is happening elsewhere, what we can influence, and what we can monitor. And it needs to run a gamut.
I think ideally you'd like to have this first, but I don't think that's not practical, and it's not real either here, so.
Well, yeah, because some are focused on a pilot.
No, absolutely right,
So
but
we're going to have to kind
I
of
think,
both.
a strategy could incorporate the whole
Yes,
process.
right.
You can define your mission, and you can define your high-level goals. It's, once you get below that surface.
Well, no,
And the predicate pieces that exist, for example, the state is invested in an essential infrastructure regulatory study that represents a cut at a strategy that can either be adopted or adapted into a broader strategic framework.
I think that's I think what you raised, the issue you raised is really important and we should talk about is that I think one of the challenges we have, and I think the thing that's making me uncomfortable is we have draft legislation out there to implement tactics when we haven't even decided what the goals are yet. And so I'm feeling a little sort of scattered about, okay, how do we tackle creating a plan when we're pushing hard, evidently, to push legislation up this year that allows us to implement specific tactics that we haven't defined in terms of supporting goals that don't exist yet. And so, I would suggest maybe as we, to Chad's point, develop your sort of high-level goals, figure out what are the basic legal authorities necessary to implement a pilot program, push that through legislatively so that at least a pilot program can be in the works this year, and then continue working on the plan, see how the pilot program works, and then come back next year with legislation that would allow the learnings of the pilot project, the work of this committee and the larger group to come up with, what the overall strategy and plan is. I feel a little like kind of wagging the dog.
Yeah, let me push back a little on that, if I might, having been in the game for 20 years or more. I mean, we were trying to get ADOT to deploy fiber along highways in 2000, and to say that's not a defined strategy flies in the face of my experience. There are elements of a strategy that have been long ago agreed on. It doesn't mean they can't be revisited, but for example, what Mike Golden has named 2 highways for the price of 1 has been something I've been working on and others for over a decade now. And so I'm tired of waiting. Let me put it that way. I'm tired of waiting for a worldview that shows all of this stuff and how it integrates. There are pieces in play and pieces that we could probably agree should be in play, short of waiting for a pilot to yield results. I'm tired of waiting.
I appreciate your frustration, but my point is that give ADOT the limited scope of authority for the pilot project. I'm getting the impression they're not wildly crazy about being involved in this, and evidenced by the request for language that's permissive as opposed to mandatory. So working with that dynamic, can we move the idea forward, but do it in a way that allows them to get comfortable with the concept, us to see how it works, and then have a clear direction of, okay, we thought this might be the right way to do it, but our learnings were that maybe there's a different way or a better way of doing it. So I get what you're saying, Mark, and I see the frustration on both sides of the issue of trying to move something forward, but making sure it meets with the desire to have this overall statewide plan with input from everybody.
I will say the pushback we've had from ADOT on the mandatory language was mandatory absent funding. That was really
Right.
And I think that's why they were pushing for permissive, so that somebody didn't come forward and say, all right, how are you going to do it? I mean, so what Mike is telling me, in terms of their conversations with ADOT is they're actually quite supportive of it. They can't do it in a vacuum and they don't have the funds to do it. But we also have not gotten things our applications are like active.
Patty, do you have any comments? I hear you wrestling.
Sorry, yeah, my battery was dying on my my other phone, and I am wrestling. But one of the things that I remember or recall from our first meeting was we want to have a short-term and long-term in this strategic plan. So we may not even have the ultimate goal figured out, but certainly we're going to have some short-term things that we know that we need to be doing. Seems like we ought to take one of these plans and start to fill in what we think and be testing, this is what we think our charter and goal is, and, start to get some input, because I think we could sit here forever and try to figure out what the goals might be. I think the state has some ideas about what those are from the different things that they've done so far. So I guess the way I'd proceed is let's start to fill in some of these blanks and start to test these. And as far as getting input from the other groups, we've got a member sitting right here that's interfacing on the education. So certainly one of us can have a charter to be interfacing with the other groups and continue. It's a iterative process that I think we need to just start moving forward on something. Start putting something on paper.
I agree with what Patty just said, and I think we could probably do worse than take a look at the California plan or even the North Carolina plan, but actually I kind of like the California plan
I like that one too.
better because it's laid out more logically. And just look at the table of contents and pick out the things that we think are relevant for Arizona, add some stuff that doesn't that we think needs to be added, and just go forward. I can speak from experience, having been involved with ATIC, the Telecommunications and Information Council, as Mark has, for well over 10 years. We worked on strategic plans before the word broadband was even really recognized or known, used at all. And we need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond just defining a strategic plan. And so we need to start, I heartily endorse what Mark said. We need to do something.
And how about if we split up?
Let someone knock it down and then we'll fix it.
Yeah, and maybe split it up, and so let's just work in some sub teams, and I'll take this section, you take this section. Maybe we can work in groups of two, so that we can actually start to put, some stuff together and get some feedback and input and talk about it as a group.
I heard you say something about short-term and long-term goals, but I think really the third piece is the pieces already in motion, what they might achieve and how they'll fit into an eventual framework.
Right.
We have been literally waiting for this strategic plan for 15 years.
Yeah.
In 1995, John Kelly, working for Symington, and Al Crawford from the private sector requested the strategic plan. Just because we have a new committee, some modest little funding, doesn't mean in 3 years we'll still be waiting for a strategic plan. And so part of my frustration is, the call for a strategic plan in 1995, and we're sitting here 16 later, calling for a strategic plan. We don't have one.
We're going to do it this time.
But in the meantime, I'm going to keep nurturing and watering those 1,000 flowers or 20 flowers that have started. My worst experience was with the demise of G-Speed. Morrison Institute hired a consultant around 99, 2000, and the study was called APNI, which we in the end decided was like a sleep disorder. Apnea went on for 18 months, another 7 months for outcomes, and G-Speed, which had a successful, over a decade run in Impact, had kind of laid back to watch for the results of the apnea study and just withered and died in those 24 months, and we lost one of the great institutions and advancing economic development coalitions in our state's history waiting for apnea's results. And so, again, I'm a little impatient, as you may gather, and unwilling to delay some of the pieces that have started to move, awaiting a plan to show exactly how they may fit in a larger strategy.
Well, and I agree. I don't know that we would want to slow anything down. I think we know a lot, and I like Patty's suggestion to look at the other plans. I resonated to the California plan as well, just because of the layout and the components, and it seems to line up nicely with what we had already talked about. So I like the idea of maybe we looked at that plan and start with the table of contents and decide, okay, is that our table of contents? And then from there start thinking about how we fill them in. And I would suspect that we already know or have 3/4 of the plan. We just need to formulate it into a document and then fill in where we think some of the gaps are. I'm still kind of looking for this, what is our vision for what we want in this state? Despite all of our work around the wires and the tunneling and all that, what is it that we want for the citizens of our state? And so,
I think that's where we start.
Yeah.
Define what's
Right,
our
the
vision,
goals.
what's our mission.
Would it help to start with the
yeah,
mission statement of the ABDC as well? That's
Yeah.
we can do that too. So what we could do today is actually look at, I didn't get to study the North Carolina one as closely. But
I looked at it, but I didn't get into it too much.
it's
captured
that's pretty short.
Yeah, I captured the executive summary
I
here.
gotcha, okay.
And
And was Jane Patterson
Jane Patterson was one of the
someone
creators of
we've
it.
dealt with and largely respect for
a good plan.
the leadership she's shown in North Carolina for a long time.
But here's the table of contents for it.
So can we display, I mean, I have these documents here, and we could we project them and just dive in? What do you guys think? Okay.
They're a state that has a plan that has a similar characteristics to Arizona, like lots of,
You mean geographically or?
geography and our nature of our reservations, all the Indian nations around.
I'm not
and
sure
all
there
the
is.
state lands just make us terribly unique.
The ones, the states that I've heard about that I can recall that have a plan are states like, these two, California and North Carolina, Maryland, that doesn't fit.
Colorado might.
I mean, Georgia is a large state, but their plan invested several $100 million in the state building and owning a fiber network, which was disastrous. And so they have some similarities structurally. Their plan is somewhat anathemic because long ago one of our strategies was the state shouldn't own networks. We decided that a long time ago, but rather be an anchor tenant to cultivate the development. So my problem is not who's similar to us geographically, as much as how that lines up with how they may have chose to plan in ways that are, I wouldn't like to say, Georgia is a similar state, because they already know their strategy was disastrous.
There aren't very many that are, but
But I get your point about the
New
content.
Mexico, in a way, is a similar size, and but I don't know that New Mexico has.
I don't think they might have a plan, but I haven't heard it talked about at all.
I'm actually online, and I'm looking at it right now. And I do cover New Mexico and Colorado, so I'm happy to interface with either one of those states, but it doesn't it's a draft, it's not too,
That's what I thought,
yeah, I think
Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado's definitely better, and I'm definitely connected to the Office of IT that's driving that. And I've got a copy of it. You guys sent it out today, right?
Well, we've got the copy of the lessons learned document from the OIT.
Yeah.
So there was a mention of Indian nations, and there are other states certainly that have, we have 22, I think, federal tribes here. But the thing is that unusual in Arizona is that we have 5 native-owned telecom companies out of the 8 nationally. So no other state looks like Arizona in terms of native-owned telecom. You know,
So
no one else probably has more than one compared to our 5.
So are we hung up on it seems like if we went through the table of contents and we found a plan we liked, and it didn't include that aspect, well, that's just something we got to fill in. And
That
it
would
sounds
be
like
one, the gap that we need to fill.
Exactly.
Kind of.
Existing networks.
Patty, can you see the screen there on your?
I've got all the plans, so don't worry about me. Just tell me what
Okay.
plan we're on. I actually can see the screen, but it's, don't worry about me. I'll just bring it up and follow along. I've got a soft copy of if it's what you sent out.
Which ones you want me to pull out?
Why don't you start with California? Oh, you have it up, okay.
Okay, I'll put that one up. That's good. I like California too, by the way. The layout.
So it looks like that whole section, pages 20 to 51, is a kind of snapshot, not a plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. I would say of the things up there, pricing is hard to know. Our map, we have pretty good maps now of availability, how many providers, which specific providers. The disparities in broadband adoption may go to demographic factors, which I don't believe we're necessarily doing. We're doing rural versus urban, but we're not really doing income or race or, age or a whole bunch of demographics.
But I do think
I
that
would say, 80-90% of what's there we probably have access to.
I think we should acknowledge that, though. If that's going to be sort of part of our strategy to say, okay, our focus is going to be on infrastructure and ensuring that rural Arizonans have, access and that's the like, then to be clear that the adoption side issues are a separate issue to be addressed, and we can decide whether or not we want
So
to.
I'm kind of suggesting we move past that whole section
Go to recommendations.
into the recommendations and see where they're focusing.
Did anybody read the section I noticed real quickly up there? It said, you can scroll back up a little bit. I haven't read that section, just caught my eye, but examining disparities in broadband adoption. I don't know what that means. Did anybody read that section?
I think that speaks to that issue.
That was,
What is-
I didn't, but I presumed, which has a nugget of letters in there that could lead you to be something, but I presumed it would have to do with economic age, rural versus urban, gender, race, others. Yeah.
There's a lot of that stuff in the North Carolina study, which I thought was really valuable, because they really asked the question and looked at what were the barriers.
To me, that section is sort of like the environmental scan section.
Yeah.
What do you have? What is it you need? What about your state? Where are you at with your coverage, services, so that we can shape however we want. Yeah,
And we have the
this
map,
environment.
right? I
And
mean,
maybe
that's a
even
big
the
part of it.
actions.
We have access to the
Right.
underlying data to flesh out a section like that. It's not that there won't be some work to produce.
Well, and I think we've produced a lot of that already. It's just almost
Pulling it
paid
together.
for half of that, yeah.
And I don't know that we'd want to produce any more unless we think it helps our case. Such a compelling piece of information
I
that
think
we
it's-
want to calculate.
I think we have some of this in a lot of different
Yeah,
reports and
agreed.
documents, combining it into this. So,
Right.
Right.
Cut and paste.
So I would say number one really deserves discussion, and that may be a whole discussion we want to have separately, because that's the goal of what do you want a rich telecom environment to look like? Do you want enough competition to drive down prices? Well, consumers may like that, providers may not. They may push back that there isn't the investment. The more you push for many providers in rural areas, the less likely their investment calculations were. So there are some, to me, difficult elements to work through in number one. And I'm not suggesting we do that right now. I'm only saying that one is in some ways, the least clear consensus that does require some decomposing and discussion and balancing of elements.
In a sense, that's the nugget of this strategy.
I was going to say,
Well,
that's like the key thing.
But I would say number two is actually equally important, and consensus is much easier, and there's already now an Arizona report that largely deals with number two. In other words, we've done our homework. That can be owned and adapted by this group, but we've been out there interviewing the ADOTs and the Land Department and the Cable Association and the Wireless Association. We've drawn together the elements of number two down to the recommendation and draft legislation level that is going to be a little easier to parse than number one.
Well, but is number one a goal, a strategy?
I think it needs
I mean, is that
and I think
should we articulate that as a goal for Arizona, or do we want to say to some?
I mean, that's a very interpretive goal.
It is an interpretive goal.
Well, that's high level.
What
That's
is
too high level.
recommended?
My point is,
Right.
it's the idea that we can get high-speed broadband to every citizen in Arizona.
I don't know
Can or not is one. Is that the goal?
I would say generally that is a goal.
I think if you take out the word build out,
Right.
then that becomes a much different statement.
You could even go to the point of ensure high-speed broadband access to all
Right.
Californians
Well,
without making
And if you look
infrastructure.
if you look at page 8 of the plan, it has a sort of a subheading to that item number 1 that says advancing new incentives for deployment and improving existing programs will create a world-class broadband infrastructure in the state.
So our pilot program focus is an example of a model for doing that in Arizona that
Jeff
we would monitor and match. Under the NTIA grant, ATII, Arizona Telecom Information Institute, is going to manage a couple of $100,000, which is small, of 30 to 40 rural grants. That's already in motion. The RFP has been, responded to and awarded. So there are elements of number one in motion and elements of number one that have yet to be, but I think the pilot fits clearly in number one. Here's an attempt at trying to do something very specific in Arizona.
How we're going to do it.
Well, it's a way. It's not.
They
I talk with my golden sometimes
That's why it's a pilot.
the way. Sorry, Patty?
That's why it's a pilot.
Right.
Because you're trying to figure out the model, so it's a way.
But even if the pilot is successful, it will only work in certain circumstances. So it may be the big gun in a armament, but it can't be the only gun.
Right. You're not going to have a one-size-fits-all solution that works in every part of the state. So, I mean, I think we have to sort of articulate that we're looking for ways to solve a number of different problems in different areas.
Well, that's right. I think that's very tactical. That's what the whole deployment thing is, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, but if this is the goal, we want to provide high-speed broadband access to every citizen in the state of Arizona, regardless of where they live. There's a lot of different ways to do that.
Right.
Phoenix is not such a big deal, right?
Right.
But certainly when you get onto some of the Indian, some of the native nations, you got a whole different challenge.
And we should email you out of the mapping efforts. We have 2 heat maps, we call them. And one is how many non-satellite providers serve any geography. And in the core Phoenix area, it's 17, plus 2 or 3 satellite providers. There are literally 20 commercial options available. But as you go further out, it drops down to 0, 1, 2, 3. And so there is no problem of availability. There may be issues of affordability or literacy, which number 3 on that list, I would suggest there are 2 things. Can you flip back to that? Or to the page 8 where there was number 3, up 1. So there are 2 things happening here, I think, that clearly go. I think Cox and I don't know if Cable One, they're a national cable industry program for people that have not had service from their cable provider getting high-speed internet for $10 a month. But they have to be new customers, and so they're trying to address the lowest levels of affordability with that program. There's the libraries that are, and GovNet, which is getting out from the county seats to schools and libraries. That's a critical element. People are driving to their libraries and parking in the parking lot because they make sure their Wi-Fi covers their parking lot, because they've been forced to, in economic times, give up internet access. On their way to work, they stop and do their email, or they come there during the day.
Affording it is one thing, accessibility is another thing.
Right.
Those are 2 different issues to be dealt with. But again, if the idea is that if you can afford it, when we make different ways of affording it, subsidies, grants, who knows, whatever, but it's got to be there.
So the whole point of that, the details around that particular recommendation are focused on the tools that are necessary for the online experience. So some of the actions listed, which are on page 66, are things like establish a public-private partnership to ensure every household with a child is able to have a computer with a high-speed internet in the home. Use incentives to increase computer donations from the private sector. So to me, that, and there's several others, that's focused on, okay, you got your connection, now what do you do with it? You need equipment on the other end to use it.
Well, that's an interesting question in terms of a strategy here, because accessing it is different than providing it. And the question is, are we concerned with providing it, or are we also concerned,
That's our
Well,
scope.
in the old days, we took the concept of the digital divide, and we would talk about it as being 3 different divides. One was availability. Can you even get service? One was affordability. Can you afford it, or what programs happen to enable you to get it? And the third was literacy. Do you want it?
Right.
Do you even care? Or if you do care, do you need help? So under the grant, there's some money for small businesses to come online with e-commerce in rural areas, for example. There's little pieces, but we would think of the digital divide from being a monolith into being 3 different areas: access, affordability, and literacy.
Well, I understand that. I just would say, though, that in terms of with respect to the challenge, this group and this plan, are we really concerned with those latter 2?
Well, and so if you look at the recommendations, and this is back to the scope question. So I think part of it is, and some of these others, like this one, create a statewide e-health network. Is that in scope? There's another one about, I think, education or research.
One of the things that intrigues me here is that, when you talk about strategy, if your goal is that everybody gets access, now how do you do that? Well, one way you can do that is you've got to fund it, right? Well, how do you fund it? Well, part of the funding can be applications. That's what I was interested in, Mark, when you were talking earlier, when you first talked about it. We have different, governmental agencies. We got one of the biggest online e-commerce providers here in Arizona, Amazon, and they have a huge presence here. What do they think?
Bet they don't pay sales tax.
Well, you know what? Work on that. But anyway,
Donate.
no, I'm just saying, you know, we got a lot of private, the private sector we need a strategy that would say, that would, you know, get the private sector engaged in helping promote all this.
And I thought that was one of the things we talked about at the first meeting, is we don't have funding, so we're going to have to figure out public-private partnerships to move this forward. So I think it's another section in the plan. I mean, it's like a risk. We have it's an issue. What's our contingency? What are we thinking about? How are we going to approach this?
Because I think, you know, in the next 10 years, Mark, if you and I are still around, you know, that it shouldn't be, the question won't be, what are people going to do with it? The question is, why don't they have it? You know, and so I think we have to be providers of, make sure that they.
Well, but to that, I'm reluctant to say that everyone should have it. Everyone should have it available.
Well, I understand.
It's impossible goal for everyone to have it.
No, I agree.
Basically, access to it.
But isn't part of it, what's the economic impact and?
I was run over somebody here.
What was that, Patty?
I just was saying, a part of it is, you know, it all plays into what we bite off first. So that's why we have these sub-teams looking at literacy or looking at economic impact, because that's what's going to help us get the right funding in the right places for the right priorities for the citizens in the state. So I don't know. I think we have to address all that, but I don't think we need to get hung up on, is that our ultimate goal is to have access out there, and how we roll it out over, you know, short-term, long-term is based on economic and literacy and all the things that health, all those things that are very important to us right now. So, you know, I think it's going to all come together as we start to fill in some of the blanks of, you know, how we do this, what do we bite up in the short term, and what's important in the long term. I agree with citizens should be available to everyone. That should be the ultimate goal.
I think that we could probably really simplify sort of the broader goals around access, about usage, about specific usage within education or health sector for reaching certain goals to, you know, for betterment of the state of Arizona, that we could come up with the specifics around those broad concepts. But I think it's kind of important to sort of get to that, you know, first and foremost, and then figure out, okay, then what is the specific goal around access?
Right.
We agree, improved access, that's the goal. Or improved adoption, that's the goal. Does that mean everybody? Maybe not. Maybe it's strategic, you know. So maybe if we start kind of laying out what are for the good of Arizona goals of the.
So that's a good point. So maybe it's back to this list of goals. Do we feel this covers? Is this adequate? Are these good goals for us to take deep dives around?
Or does it go beyond the scope that we want to?
Yeah, these are specific recommendations.
Well, it might, and
supporting broader goals.
Yeah, so that's the sort of the counter question. Is there something on there that we don't want to tackle? It seems to me they cover the work of the task groups already, because we have a health task group, we have an education task group. We've got a pilot. I mean, it seems to be pretty encompassing.
Right.
I guess a quick question. I've been to some ATIC meetings over the last couple of years, and you know, one of the things I don't have a good sense of is, you know, I guess because I've been in technology for so long, to me it's a priori that you put broadband out there. I mean, I don't need to sit here and build a big business case. Right?
Well.
But now, hold on a minute. Let me get to my question. So my real question is, you know, to the extent that there may be disagreement with the concept that says broadband ought to be available to everybody in Arizona, what would the issues be with respect to
Population density, delivering services on a per customer basis is minuscule in an urban area compared to a rural area. So it's not a priority because it's an investment decision that providers have to make.
Priority is desired. You're
Right.
What's the ROI?
But I thought you said it's a priority, that it be available, that it be invested in. But the investment doesn't always pencil out for providers.
We make the priority assumption on electricity.
Yeah, we do.
Yes, but that was with substantial.
That was the question. We make the
Yes.
the
takes to get there is where the,
So the real, I don't know how much this thing needs to include the business case that says everybody ought to have it, be available to everybody, or if we could just roll out.
well, I think it kinda does.
Yeah,
Because not everybody has it.
Yeah.
So if we didn't have to make the case, then I think everybody would
And
have it.
everyone doesn't have it because there are reasons.
There are different
We have to
reasons,
identify
right,
the reasons.
right.
And
And
when the reasons can be moderated
Right.
Well,
by
I think you have to
strategic
do it,
action.
identify why they should have it. It's more.
Prioritize, but you can prioritize how you get there and who it goes to first.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it
well,
also justifies your funding if you've got these business cases.
So here's the North Carolina table of contents. So that compared to what we saw with the California plan.
I think
I
we'd have to
know.
go down to pages 20 to 22 to see really, yeah.
I know, right? I'm like, okay, switch, I'm clicking here to try to.
But I think we'd have to go down to that last section 5 to see how they've structured their recommendations to get any tangible.
So they did theirs by sectors.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah, like I printed off the
And this is
The
executive summary,
delegating.
and it's all devoted
My
to job
problem
opportunities.
with this is it's not specific. It says municipalities should develop strategies, nonprofits should promote, but these are not hard and actionable things. These are well wishes.
Desired status.
Right.
These are well wishes for the others.
But these are the goals of the strategic
Oh, yeah.
plan. Your work groups are gonna flesh this out, right? I think this is really what we need to be creating, these high-level goals by sector, and then the task groups go in and fill in the blanks.
I like that, right there, there's a great argument right there. Districts should develop strategies to ensure households are not disadvantaged or isolated as services are moved online. The state's moving that way. All government's moving to put more services online because it's less expensive. Well, there's a trade-off of that cost, right? Which is maybe you have to provide access now to people to be able to do that. So I think that's a great statement to put in there. The state has got clear plans to move more things, more services. Look at hey, what do you call it?
There's legislation
E-government,
passed to do that.
government generally.
But that pushes the goal or responsibility to the local government.
Well, it just says,
Right.
no, that just says if you want to build an argument, of 4 or 5, broad statements that says why we need to do this, that's a big one.
Yeah, but I think it's too soft.
Right.
Well, it may be too soft, but in many cases, they tighten it up or harden it, but the point is, it's
But
a big
that-
one, because it invests the state government in, it makes them a serious stakeholder in
Yeah.
wanting to do something.
I would say that if we want to address, ROI and motivation and why do we need this, I think we can extract a good bit of stuff from the North Carolina plan. But I still like the layout of the California plan, but I think you're right, and the North Carolina plan has a lot of that.
I think back to the issue of scope too, I think we want to be clear that it's the goal to affect access in unserved or rural areas, because if you're really talking about a goal around driving adoption, that's going to be across all sectors of the community, not rural. It's primarily going to be, it's going to turn out to be an urban issue, as far as adoption and usage goes. So if we want to say, we're not going to tackle that, the purpose of this, focus or this plan is to ensure the access, and here's how we do that. It will move some of these other things, but there's this whole other separate issue, which is the adoption piece. Because I want people's expectations to be managed about, okay, we want to see how many more people are using the internet because of what this plan accomplished. Well, unless you take on the adoption
And I don't
issue.
think it's a purely rural strategy.
Right. But if your goal is, we want to ensure access to everybody, we're not really so focused on adoption, and we increased access by, X percentage, or we hit 100% Arizona-wide, then you think, okay, we met our goals. But if it's really about getting more Arizonans to use the internet, we got to think about scope.
I mean, to Susan's point, should we have a conversation and try and define what our scope is and what the mission of the strategic plan is, instead of kind of arguing, because I think at this point, if we're arguing over these, we're in the weeds, because we don't even know how big is this gonna be, how small is this gonna be, what's the limitations of the public sector, what's the expectations of the private sector? I mean, we haven't even gotten to that point yet.
And what did the dollars we got for the plan, what did that say? You will develop a plan that will accomplish what? And we got a grant, right? So we're developing a plan.
It's almost done.
It was just for the
Well, here's-
planning process.
Here's some of the
Planning
goals
what?
that California.
You know what I mean? Like, is it planning for expanded access, or is it planning for increased adoption? I mean, the money clearly has some strings that they want results from the
I don't
state,
know, I don't
right?
think it
Yeah,
was.
but it's availability on our.
It was taking inventory of what we even had. We spent most of it on that.
Oh,
Is
Good to start.
yeah.
connecting to.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
so-
there were two grants. There was the planning grant and there was the mapping grant. The mapping's done, and this is the planning piece.
Well, the mapping goes on for another 3 years with biannual,
First 2 rounds.
right.
I also want to make sure as we define goals, we can get the numbers of adoption higher than percentage more quickly in urban areas, just because of the density. So we don't want to lose, we don't want to lose the absolute numbers of the lower population rural areas. Right. So, I mean, when you start doing percentages, make sure you know of what.
So here are some of the key goals that, that they point to in the executive summary for the California plan, which maybe plays to the scope question, which I believe then leads to their ultimate recommendation. So Patty, we're looking at page something, 7, at the adopted 3 key goals
Okay,
in the executive summary.
okay.
Barely more than half of California's adopted broadband at home. That seems low. The national stats are in the mid to high 60s by now.
Was that back, though, in 2006, or was this the resulting study?
Yeah.
Oh, San Francisco is probably 110%. In San Joaquin Valley, and it's probably less than that.
I actually have sort of a question about the way that first goal is stated. Is it really that they ensure affordable broadband infrastructure, or assure affordable broadband?
Right. Well, yeah, well,
Kind of different things, you know. If you wanted to Mark's point, deal with barriers to entry and helping private sector develop the infrastructure in an affordable manner, that's one thing. Having access to affordable broadband service is a different thing. Am I reading that right?
But I think that's that's something that we can change. If we use this outline, we don't, I mean, that's where we need to make it our plan and fix it to fit Arizona.
So that to me says we got to have the infrastructure. That's the first bullet, and everyone needs to have access to it. The second bullet is about services and applications. So we're going to promote whatever language we're going to use, but we're going to look at education, we're going to look at health care, whatever that scope is. We've got to have the services on it. And then the third bullet is all about planning for the future. So
yeah, you worked with me on ERISA a couple of years ago, which was a National Science Foundation grant that we attempted for $2 million to get orders of magnitude more effective bandwidth between the 3 universities and TGen for high-performance computing. Cutting-edge science, terabytes and petabytes of data moving at unusual rates by using dark fiber. We just saw Mayor Gordon, and some national Lambda Rail stuff happening. To me, number 3, we're so often focused on the least enabled. To me, that statement illustrates the other end of the spectrum. And I think you can largely afford to ignore the middle, but we almost always focus on the low end.
on the low end.
And it's that lack of focusing on the high end. And actually, Mayor Gordon, as he moves to the private sector, is going to direct operations for that $200 million telehealth data repository, Dr. Sung Su's, And so all the Lambda Rail stuff, all the high-performance computing stuff, and all the bandwidth for that is something that, to me, we too often ignore. We're always focused on the low end. I think we need, and that's what I'm reading into, in part, if you have that high end happen, it does trickle down, because you have, circuits going to OC 192 and OC 768 to serve these, and beyond to serve these. That stuff trickles down to broader availability or performance. So we can afford to ignore the middle, but we too often ignore the high end.
Well, these are, I don't know about that last bullet point. It seems to me if you do the first one, the second one ought to be part of it. But I don't know why they broke that out separately. They go two different broadband infrastructures. I don't know. But if you said, maybe this plus North Carolina, we hope some good stuff. Because I would reword that first bullet. The second bullet makes sense to me. That was the whole point of it. Let the state drive the need for it, or the reason for it, or in order, because it's going to provide more and more services online. Which reduces people's need to go into buildings, and reduces the real estate footprint for the state, we hope, and all the other good stuff. Blah, blah. Yeah, I know. Head count.
Preaching to the choir.
I don't know about that. That last one that's really strange, that third bullet point there.
Well, that's
why I try to introduce the high end of performance.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the piece we often ignore, is the supercomputing, the super bandwidth, the Lambda rails, the really high end of performance.
But maybe that's a good goal just in and of it, stated just like that, Mark, as opposed to this.
Right. A little bit too vague,
right.
Not clear enough.
So
the question is, does it seem like, to your point, does that speak scope to you?
Yeah, I love that first paragraph. If you're looking at, what's our mission or scope, especially the remove the barriers. I mean, that, very specific. We all understand what the word remove means, and we understand what the word barriers mean, that type of thing. And then you get to the goals. I mean, I think there are some more bullet points that could be added to this. But as we work with some of the other task committees, I mean, we can, the goals themselves are very broad enough to be the mission. Maybe they need to be a little more specific. For education, it does this. For health, it does that. For economic development, this is our bullet point for that. I mean, that's.
Well, I'd be happy to volunteer with somebody else to take this plan from California and North Carolina and work out. See what we can
kind of start bringing this together.
And then maybe we could send that around, Jeff, to all of the other task groups and say, hey, here's what we're starting with. What do you think? Add to it.
That's a great idea. So who would like to help with that?
You probably you here in Tucson.
I'm in Tucson. No, it isn't.
Bids travel to Michelle at the speed of light.
I was going to say, I do have email, and I would be glad to help with that, but who else would like to help with that as well?
I certainly would. Though I do have a question for Jeff and Eric. Is there some, I saw in the minutes of an earlier committee meeting, a meeting I couldn't make, that there may be some funding allocation from the overall planning grant to have a consultant carry some of the water in this group. Is that?
Yes, there is money that's unspoken for. We need to talk to Mike and Galen about how they choose to divide up the pot.
Well, exactly for what? So Galen's statement was, yes, there is money. You could, for example, ask or propose to use a consultant to construct the plan. The question I have is, at what point in the process? Is it, here's our content, take it and make it look nice like the California plan? Or is it, here are our ideas, and then take that and put the words around it? I don't know, that's where I have a question.
I think there's other possible elements to that, which is go out and survey or engage specific. Go out and engage specific communities of interest and either get their ideas or commitments to specifics. There's research and summarize. There, and so I need to be a little careful because I would have an interest in being a consultant to the group as I already am
Yeah.
to the right-of-way study.
Well,
and
we can't
other
use
things.
you, we gotta use somebody else.
No, then I quit.
Like conflict of interest.
No, I mean, we have enlightened
Yeah.
self-interest.
I'm sure
groups,
everybody
and maybe other,
What do you think about using this to drill down into the scope?
The only thing I would say is this is probably, California with the 3 bullet points actually pretty well captured. You may want to, reframe it slightly, but from what I've heard in the room today and what I've heard in the other task force, they do a pretty good job of just those 3 saying that is what we're all about.
but they could be melded with some of this.
Yeah.
I mean, you have mission scope.
These are bullet points that would support any one of those 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mission statement
Yeah.
approved by the council, so it'd
So
be good to
this-
follow this in some
Yeah,
way.
coupled with the other
Yeah,
2
make it
plans,
easy.
just bringing the content together, it feels like.
Is it possible to post somewhere a document that people can see?
A wiki document.
Or Google Docs.
Like a Google Docs, yeah.
Where as changes are made and as we're melding them.
Google Docs should work for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
try that.
Be a good one to set that out.
Okay.
Need somebody to manage the document. Need somebody to manage the document. Unless you want a wiki document.
Well, somebody needs to take the first stab at actually pulling the,
Right.
all, just take them all and kind of start piecing them together, and then people can, like you're suggesting, contribute or read, and then review and comment. And so I would think whoever does that should be the one to set up the Google Doc. Can you do that? Great. What do you think, Patty? Where are you with this?
Whoops, I love it. I love the idea of having either a subset put, a draft together and then let us all add comments or get input in that way. Is great.
It occurs to me, looking at the whereas clauses, there's goals that are built in to those whereas clauses if you extract them out, improve healthcare delivery while lowering costs. I mean, that could be a goal around, we can wait and see what those committees, task force come up with. Enhance government services, improve educational outcomes, because those are all components of if you're successful in expanding access.
And so those recommendations, California plan could be more like this language.
I think the California plan a broader scope than what we have there.
It would be important
Which
to
means-
follow what
Yeah.
this to some degree.
Yeah,
Or at least
I
you
mean,
know where we
to the
covered
extent
it.
that it aligns with our declared AEDC
Right.
is a good thing and seems to echo it, absolutely. But I think it's going to be relatively easy to meld some of this language into what we're seeing in California and North Carolina.
So who's the audience? How widely published and reviewed is this?
This is
40
on the
people.
website now,
Yeah.
and it's been approved by the council, ABDC.
So there's about 25 people on the council. There's been about 75, 80 people maybe involved in meetings and committees that have probably bothered to look at this. The audience has probably been under 100.
Again, this other than this very specific wording, this is radically different than what you see in
No,
slightly very worried in other venues. It's all the same
it's pretty,
stuff. How do you put it together?
Right.
Who in the legislature kind of has that vested position in all this stuff?
Interesting question. It depends on the general broadband. I don't know that we have any champions down there. If you're talking about telehealth, you're talking about e-learning, there are more application-oriented champions than there are,
That's helpful.
Bob Burns, who's been in some of the committee meetings, is not a current sitting senator, but is a long-known and renowned e-health, telehealth champion who we've considered a potential vector to carry some of our legislative viruses into the houses of government, for example.
It's a cynical way to put it.
but he's
Actually, to go viral, though,
I'm like, what is it?
Well, you got Rich Crandall, who's been sort of the champion on the education side
Right.
of technology.
Right.
Definitely. Yep.
And Hubethal, a past legislator who heads the Department of Education, who has been cultivated and co-opted into this whole vision.
I think one of our challenges is there's no sizzle in infrastructure. There's sizzle in the application.
Applications.
Right.
Well, that's right.
That's why it's harder to sell.
That's why you need the
That's what
application.
we have to
That's why you need the applications
Yep.
to help drive the
Right.
case for it.
That's why we have the sub-teams, that's right, justify it. And it takes time.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got a good next step in terms of starting to meld the contents into one, start
Right,
with a
trying to do
draft
page 1
plan.
and 2
Right,
of the document.
great,
Yeah. The next council meeting right now is scheduled for, I believe,
February 9th.
okay.
February 9th.
February 9th, okay. So the question for the committee is, do you want to have something, not necessarily for approval, but at least for review by then, or do you want to wait till a meeting after that? I mean, I'm just trying to help you.
I was thinking about trying to get something out by next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have something, because I think we'll, so I'm
not
really
looking at-
diving into.
I don't think what we have is the strategic plan, but it may
No, that's a good question,
it may
yeah.
be the framework and introduction
Yeah.
and some
Yeah.
high level, like I like the California recommendations.
Yeah.
I think we could debate and agree on a set of high level recommendations that then had to, obviously, the devil in the details, move down that level.
Well, at some point, when you look at in the context of the plan, or the content of the plan, then we start talking about actions, and there's where our measures come in, and things like that. So there's definitely a lot to be done there.
There's some documents that we have put together as well that I will send
Okay.
the group, some PowerPoints,
Okay.
like the 2 highways for nearly the price of
Right.
one, price of one, et cetera. That explains some of the thought.
Well, and the new presentation has got a lot of at least the grant level goals of what we're trying to do
The Digital Arizona one?
Yeah.
And I'll get the heat maps out, because they can kind of start the framework of the, what did you call it, the current state view.
Oh, environmental.
Environmental scan. And sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mention, one heat map is the number of non-satellite providers in any geography. The second heat map is the maximum download speed available from any provider that serves a geography, so you can see how it moves from 1 megabit per second at the edges to 50
Yeah.
megabit per second.
And I think we had some of that, right? One of the documents we had, or I saw, had a lot of the maps that showed connectivity and, yeah, okay.
There's new versions for the spring 2011 submittal that are not broad circulation. The ones you've seen are probably the fall 2010 versions.
One thing I would keep in mind is that I imagine, I haven't looked at them, but I'm thinking that the Arizona maps look a lot different from the California maps.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to just focus in on what California's, the structure is what they provide.
Right.
Is good, but
Agreed.
Michelle, this is something that we've also been circulating throughout different agencies and different folks we're talking with.
Okay.
Again, all this,
That's
we've changed from rural to non-metro because we didn't know how to define metro rural. But
And has this been distributed, or can it
I can
be?
get it served, I can send it to everybody in the group, yeah.
Okay, that'd be good too, because some of these measures might be
This is the graphic that
usable.
you depiction.
We're gonna get some metro stuff in there too.
Yeah, distribute that, there might be some things in there too to incorporate. Okay.
What is the broadband adoption? Does that mean people using it where it already exists, or is that rolling out more?
I think it's generally the percentage of consumers that uptake rates.
Yeah, they're buying it, they're using it.
So in the California plan, I think it focuses on usage, and that's where it starts to get into having the applications that people then will use, e-learning options, telehealth, that kind of thing. So you've got your connection, it's lit, and you're actually using it.
You may have heard me say this, I don't remember which group, but at a recent conference we went to, fairly ubiquitous broadband in multiple communities, but it wasn't being used. And they were having a dickens of a time with people getting to use it. What they finally did is they gave it to them for 90 days for free. The local provider did that. And they said, all right, at the end of 90 days, we're going to turn it off. Everybody who was using it got it. It's just nobody would take the step to see how they could benefit from it. So adoption, to your earlier point, adoption is really important.
Start that shopping online, man. There's no going back.
Yeah.
Get out there and
Well,
find
the
jobs
application,
and,
does your kid need it for school, or your
Well,
grandmother
yeah,
needs it
yeah,
for
I
her
gotta-
healthcare in,
yeah.
Snowflake,
gotta
Arizona,
upload
then
your assignment into
It's a demand
Terminator.com.
But broadband's also always a moving goal. I think I just saw, and I haven't confirmed the source, that the FCC has readjusted their definition upward to 4 megabit downstream, 1 megabit upstream as the minimum threshold of what they consider broadband. Whereas 2 years ago, it was 768K was the minimum. But I always liked John Kelly's definition was broadband needs to be fast enough not to bore a 10-year-old.
I know, which is
You know,
not
'cause
a meg or 10 meg. It's a gig.
they're the instant gratification generation, right?
Anyway, okay, so we're going to start building the plan. The other thing, and I don't want to keep us here longer than we need to be, because I think it feels to me like we've got a pretty good next step that we can focus on. There was an item in here that I thought we might just quickly touch on, and there was a question that came up about the pilot planning. This was from Mike Golden wondering, how is that going to be handled in the task groups? Do you guys know? Are they who's driving the pilot plan for the pilot? Okay.
We do know that we need to have the 3 groups that are actually working on that level of strategy before we go to the single pilot recommendation. No, we don't know how that's going to happen yet.
Okay, and so do we need to consider that, incorporating that here, or how does that work?
I'm on 3 groups, and I didn't name them all as Oris did, and I assume some people are on multiple groups, task groups. I would suggest that us trying to be more than informed but take an active hand in guiding the pilot would be dilutive rather than contributory to our efforts. What I am seeing is there are ranking exercises going on with a pretty good matrix in e-health and e-learning to rate communities where high priority on practicality, but there's about 25, 35 factors on these lists, so there are thinking processes underway that are consuming some of the task groups at the moment. I would only caution us from being consumed by pilot development in this group.
My internal pragmatist, education came out of the chute first. People will rally around modifying that as opposed to trying to merge three disciplines.
Okay.
I mean, people will take advantage of what the work that's already been done rather than try and recreate it.
Okay, so we just let that keep going the way it is. And I agree with you. I like the path we're on. We're focused on kind of the broader planning, and I'd be a little concerned about getting too far into the details.
Yeah,
Pilot,
I agree.
that would take our time. Okay, okay.
And we can incorporate the pilot as part of the strategy to support the plan.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right, so I think we'll weave it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else we need to cover?
I guess I only want to make this a little more evident because it does go to 1 or 2 categories of the high-level recommendations that we're going to have, and has fairly developed thought about what those recommendations might look like for removing barriers. So, I think the link's been circulated to 2 of the task groups, though no one seems to be talking about it.
Okay.
So I don't think we need that as a very next step. I think we're going to see some of the recommendations emerge at the high level for which this is a think piece and Arizona-specific regulatory analysis and opinion.
And that's the draft legislation?
There are several pieces of draft legislation that are captured in an earlier form in the appendices that have kept evolving.
Okay.
But there's all the underlying, what are the regulatory structures, what are the perceptions of industry, communities, and others about what the barriers are and how they can be generally resolved.
And so do we have that document?
It's on the website
Oh, all right.
in two parts. But my only caution is there are two of the three pieces of legislation captured as a snapshot in the appendix, superseded by later drafts of that legislative language that are circulating.
Okay.
But the core recommendations remain the same.
Okay. So we need to just incorporate that in the thinking.
Well, we have some, like Keeling and I have some pride of ownership, but we would want this committee and the other task group on right-of-way to really own it as their own, to take it to the next level and say, you guys got most of this right, but here's where we feel, for our purposes, it needs to be adapted. So I'm not suggesting we adopt it outright, but that we look to it and adapt it as foundational work that has.
What's that called?
Yeah, what is the title?
It's
Essential infrastructure.
It's called Essential Infrastructure for Information Delivery,
You said
or
that's
as
on
we
the-
know it, the right-of-way ROW study.
It's been on one of the attachments for this group.
Yeah, I sent that to y'all.
It was included? Oh, I just clearly didn't get through all the documents.
Use the X on the top. So I was looking where, because
They have it all by email, but I was just looking on the website.
Okay. If it's in the email that you sent, that's fine. Okay.
I'm sure pretty much probably by email.
Well, yeah, and I hit some of the key ones, but not all. I didn't get through all the links.
Which draft is the latest, VO2H?
I believe
November.
that is, yes, VO2H is the main body. The appendix Cs are VO3.
I don't think we ever put that on the website, Mark.
Oh, I thought I saw links to it
Yeah.
on the ABDC.
No, I don't think we did.
So we only circulated it to the right-of-way task group.
Because there was a conflict of the lobbying conflict and such. We had that discussion.
Why don't I just circulate the PDFs
Okay.
as the co-authoring
Okay.
party to this committee?
Yeah. And it's from you.
I've got all
or not
Yeah, not from.
some other thing. Okay.
I will.
So you will distribute.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so our next meeting is January 8th,
Oh, have we set that?
right? Yes. So what we agreed in the last meeting was that we'd meet today, and we'd meet again on January 8th.
What time is that?
10:30 to 12:30, probably in the same room.
January 8th in Bighorn.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it.
The 5th?
It's the 5th.
Oh, the 5th, my mistake.
5th of January.
The Thursday,
Yeah,
because we
Thursday.
said, yeah, it was in the email that we,
It's in the Bighorn?
in here, yeah.
Here? Okay.
And then every
I will
2
send it
weeks,
on out, let you know.
every 2 weeks after that. So Thursdays, every 2 weeks on Thursday,
We've only gotten this far right now with the actual room bookings.
yes.
We'll go through that.
Every 2 weeks, Thursdays, 10:30 to 12:30, somewhere in this vicinity on the floor.
It'll either be here in
The one down
The
Sawtooth.
Sawtooth, yeah. Okay. And we'll have call-in opportunities every time. Okay, so anything else, Dennis? Thank you for volunteering to get us started in our
The next meeting,
writing
sorry, I
exercise.
walked out.
Yeah, January 5th is the next meeting, 10:30 to 12:30, here or on the phone. And then every 2 weeks after that. Okay, on Thursday. And I'll send that in the notes
All right.
stuff as well, so you can get it on your calendars.
Looks like next week, looks like we'll have this written the following week too.
Okay. With that, anything else we need to cover? Patty, anything else from you?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for including me remotely.
So we'll just wait to hear
I'll
from
try to get,
you or the few of us.
Mark,
that are working. Yeah.
I'll try to get something put together the next 3 or 4 days, shoot it over to you first.
And Michelle on
And
it.
Michelle, well, whoever, and then
Yeah.
then we can, when we feel like it's appropriate, we'll just post it up.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And then
Thank
we'll,
you.
include instructions. Okay. That's it.
Thank
Yeah, thank you.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.